In this video, we're going to talk about 3 exercises you can do at home or in the gym that correct or reduce an anterior pelvic tilt and improve your posture. Anterior pelvic tilt occurs whenever our center of gravity is falling forward. In this circumstance, we'll have a pelvis that tends to tilt more forward, and it's typically driven by the lower back muscles as well as hip flexors and the quads. All of these muscles are important, and we're definitely going to stretch them out and work on the opposing muscle groups such as the hamstrings and the abdominal muscles to correct this, as these muscles help to pull us back in the line of gravity. Now that we know the basic gist of what's going on, let's dive into the exercises. So the first exercise we're going to use is a hip flexor and low back stretch. You're going to want a foam roller and you're going to place it at the sacrum, or sort of the top of the pelvis. You'll then be in that position, and it basically lifts you up into a bridge in which your bottom is higher than your head. And then you'll bring both of your knees toward your chest. Once you have that, you'll probably already start to feel that low back stretch kick in. You want to lock that in by holding on to one of the knees while you then extend the other leg out. That will kick in the hip flexor stretch. So we're using constraints to get these stretches to happen. So the foam roller is to decompress and stretch the low back, whereas holding onto the leg gets the hip flexor to stretch out on the other side. Now you're going to hold this, and instead of holding for time, I like to do breaths. So you'll just take 5 big deep breaths here, which gets you to about 30 to 45 seconds depending on how you do this. And then you're going to switch sides. So some things to watch out for so you don't cheat this stretch. Make sure that when you extend the leg out to stretch the hip flexor, that you're not letting that leg move out to the side or externally rotate. So just take a quick glance down, and if you see your knee is pointing out at like a 45-degree angle, you're not going to get as much stretch. So try to keep your knee and your foot in line with the hip on that side that you're stretching the entire time. So once you've got this down, you'll then complete 2 to 3 rounds of 5 breaths on each side. So now that we've inhibited or stretched out the hip flexors and the low back muscles, we want to activate their opposing muscle groups, such as the abdominals and the hamstrings. So we're going to set up in a foam roller bridge with pelvic tilts. So you'll take your feet and place them on the roller, so that way the arches of your feet are the main contact point. You'll then place a block or a ball in between the knees and bridge up onto the roller. So once you're bridged up, you're going to squeeze the knees together against the block or the ball. And then we're going to place the hands on the hips and go into some anterior and posterior tilts. These tilts are going to help us sense and activate opposing muscle groups. So as you go into an anterior tilt, you should feel your quads and your low back, probably more just your low back. And then as you go into a posterior tilt, or tucking your tailbone, you should feel your hamstrings, abdominals, and maybe even some glutes kick in. So there's really no way to mess up this exercise. It's really meant to sense the position that you're already in, which is an anterior tilt, and then how to get out of that position while using the hamstrings, glutes, and abdominals to do so. Not to mention, you're really going to strengthen the hamstrings with this, and they should be on fire. One additional tip I find to be very helpful is to sequence some breathing. So as I do an anterior tilt, I inhale through the nose, and as I do a posterior tilt, I exhale through the mouth. So once you're in that bridge position, you're going to knock out 3 rounds of 10 to 20 anterior posterior tilts. Think an anterior tilt plus a posterior tilt equals 1 rep. So the last exercise we'll use for the series is a foam roller marching. So I think we've stretched out the hip flexors and the low back muscles that are holding us in this anterior pelvic tilt. We've then created some sensory awareness of what an anterior tilt and a relative posterior tilt feels like. And now we want to get some reciprocal motion similar to walking, as well as a little bit of rotation, and really go after those hamstring muscles in order to pull that pelvis down out of that anterior pelvic tilt and back in line with gravity. So you're going to set up in the same exact way that you set up for the anterior posterior tilt foam roller bridge, but you won't have the block between the knees. So you bridge up, arches on the foam roller, and then when you're up in that bridge, you want to be able to find a neutral position of the pelvis. So you don't want to be in that anterior tilt, and honestly, you don't want to be in too much of a posterior tilt either. You want to find that middle ground between the two. So use what you just learned in the sensory exercise just before this to find that middle ground. Once you have that middle ground, you'll then march your feet up and down, really kicking in the hamstrings in order to get some strength going unilaterally or one leg at a time. So a couple ways you can cheat this exercise is you'll hold more of an arched position to where your ribs are flaring out or you're still in a relative anterior pelvic tilt. One way you can combat that is to reach both arms up toward the ceiling, and that helps you kind of hang down in more of a neutral pelvic position. Another thing to watch out for is as you're marching, your feet start to turn outward to where your feet point, say, out to the side at a 45-degree angle. You want to make sure that those feet stay straight forward, your knees stay straight forward, everything is in alignment from hip, knee to foot. So this exercise is pretty dang tough. So if you're having a lot of trouble with it, you can hold this isometrically, in which you would march one side up and then reach the opposite hand up to the ceiling and say hold that for 5 breaths or as long as you really can. And then you would do 3 rounds of 5 breaths on both sides. But if you're good to go with the alternating marching, you'll knock out 3 rounds of 20 reps or 10 each leg. So that is it for this video. If you would like to know more about anterior pelvic tilt and maybe how it relates to your body type, check out this video right here.